I was standing in the middle of a narrow street in the old city of Sfat, in northern Israel, at 3 in the morning, with nothing but a cracked leather wallet and a question that had been eating at me for 11 years. The kind of question that doesn't leave you alone at dinner, doesn't give you peace when you lie down, and certainly doesn't disappear when you're surrounded by the hum of success and the applause of people who think you figured something out. My name is Doron Ashkenazi. I'm not a rabbi. I'm not a mystic. I'm not someone who grew up with candles on a Friday night or with the scent of old parchment in his childhood home. I grew up in a modest apartment in a city that smelled like diesel and ambition, raised by a man who believed that numbers were the only language the universe respected. My father, Binyamin Ashkenazi, was an accountant by trade and a skeptic by nature. He had no patience for what he called the theater of faith. He said that every blessing ever uttered was just a psychological trick people played on themselves to keep from falling apart. For most of my adult life, I agreed with him. I built a small distribution company by the time I was 32. Nothing spectacular by the standards of the people you probably follow online, but enough to feel like I had cracked something open, enough to make me stop worrying about whether the electricity bill would ruin my month, enough to make me feel for a few years that I had somehow outrun whatever invisible force had made my parents' lives feel so relentlessly tight. And then everything I had built started to quietly collapse. Not in a dramatic way. Not the kind of collapse that makes the news or earns you sympathy at gatherings. It was the slow, waterlogged kind of ruin. The kind where every single decision you make seems reasonable in isolation, but somehow the accumulation of all those reasonable decisions produces an outcome that is completely unreasonable. Partners who shifted, contracts that dissolved, a market that moved in a direction nobody had predicted, my savings thinning like ice in a warm spring, my confidence, which I had once carried like a stone in my chest, becoming something more like sand, present but impossible to grip. I tried everything I knew. I read books with aggressive titles. I hired a consultant who wore expensive shoes and talked for 6 hours without saying anything I hadn't already heard. I made spreadsheets with 17 columns. I reorganized my workspace. I woke up at 5 in the morning and exercised until my body ached, convinced that discipline alone could force the universe back into cooperation. Nothing turned. One evening I was sitting across from my older sister, Orpah, who is 6 years older than me and has always had a way of watching people that makes them feel both seen and slightly uncomfortable. She was eating soup. I was talking. Or rather, I was performing the monologue of a man who is trying very hard not to sound desperate while being completely desperate. She put down her spoon. She looked at me the way people look at someone who has been arguing with a locked door for so long that they've forgotten to check whether there's a window. She said, "Have you ever spoken to Rabbi Nachmanov?" I didn't know who that was. She told me, an elderly rabbi who lived in Tzfat, originally from a family of mystics from the mountains of Georgia, the country, not the American state. A man who, according to Orpah, had a reputation for seeing things in people that they couldn't see in themselves. Not a fortune teller, not a performer, just a man who had spent 80 years paying attention. I told her that wasn't my world. She said, "Doron, the world you've been living in hasn't exactly been working." 3 weeks later, I was on a flight. I want to be honest with you about what I expected. I expected to be mildly moved, vaguely comforted, and fundamentally unchanged. I expected the kind of gentle spiritual experience that makes for a good story at a dinner party without requiring anything from you. I had prepared a polite face and a reasonably open mind, and I thought that would be enough. It was not enough. Reb Eliezer Nachmanov lived in a house that seemed too small to contain him. He was a compact man with hands that looked like they had been carved out of old wood, and eyes so pale they seemed to belong to a different century. He spoke slowly, in a mixture of Hebrew and Yiddish and occasional Russian, and the young man who served as his informal assistant translated the parts I couldn't follow. His name was Tuvia, the assistant. He had the focused quietness of someone who had heard extraordinary things so many times that he had learned to sit very still. I sat down. The room smelled like paper and something herbal I couldn't identify. There was a single window with uneven glass that made the street outside look slightly curved. The rabbi looked at me for what felt like a long time without saying anything. Then he asked me to take out my wallet. I reached into my jacket and placed it on the table between us. It was a slim, dark brown bifold wallet, bought at an airport, worn at the corners. He looked at it the way a doctor looks at an X-ray, not at the surface, but at what the surface suggests. He asked me what was inside it. I listed the obvious things: bank cards, an identity document, a few receipts I kept meaning to throw out, a photograph of my daughters, Sipporah and Margalit, folded once, some cash, a membership card to a gym I hadn't visited in months. He nodded slowly. Then he said something that I've been turning over in my mind every single day since that morning in Sfat. He said, "A man's wallet is not where he keeps his money. It is where he keeps his intentions. And right now, yours is telling a story of a man who is preparing to lose." I wanted to push back. I wanted to say that a wallet is a practical object, that it holds cards and currency and nothing more, that attributing symbolic weight to a leather bifold was exactly the kind of thinking my father had warned me about. But something about the way he said it made the argument dry up before it reached my mouth. He leaned forward. He told me about 3 objects, not amulets, not lucky charms in the sense of objects you rub like a lamp and wait for smoke. He was very clear about this distinction. He said that every tradition that has survived long enough to become ancient has understood something about the relationship between the physical and the invisible, not as superstition but as architecture. The way you arrange the objects closest to your body is the way you arrange your expectations. And the way you arrange your expectations is the way you arrange your reality. He said that for generations, the men and women in his family had carried 3 specific things. The first was a small piece of paper, handwritten, containing a verse from a text considered foundational, not as decoration, not as performance, but as a daily reminder of what you serve beyond your own appetite. He explained that most people who fall into patterns of scarcity are not failing financially. They are failing spiritually first. They have, slowly and without noticing, allowed their wallet to become a temple only to their own anxiety. A single line of sacred text, carried daily, functions as a counterweight. It is a physical object that insists, every time you reach for your money, that there is a larger context than the transaction. He told me the specific verse his grandmother Rivka Nachmanoff had carried for 57 years, folded into a piece of cloth and placed behind every card and every wallet she ever owned. He said she died at 91 and never once experienced what he called the poverty of expectation, even in years when food was scarce. I wrote it down. I still carry it. The second object was something I had never heard of before. A small coin, not for spending, not of any particular monetary value, but a coin that represents a closed cycle. In the tradition he described, this coin is sometimes called a witness coin, an object that has been held during a moment of gratitude, ideally a moment when something you had worked for finally arrived. The point is not the coin itself. The point is the memory encoded in the act of holding it. He said that the human body is extraordinarily sensitive to symbolic objects, in a way that the modern world dismisses as primitive, but that neuroscience is only beginning to understand. When you reach into your wallet and your fingers touch something that your nervous system associates with completion, with gratitude, with arrival, you change subtly the emotional register in which you make financial decisions. You are not anxious. You are remembering that things have in fact arrived before. And memory of arrival is the precondition of arrival. I sat very still while he said this. I thought about every decision I had made in the last 3 years, while operating from a baseline of quiet dread. Every negotiation entered with a body already tensed for loss. Every contract reviewed with the background hum of someone who expected the other person to find the exit before he did. I thought about how invisible that dread had been to me, how thoroughly I had mistaken it for realism. The third object was the most unusual, and also in retrospect the most obvious. He told me to carry a photograph of someone I had helped. Not my children, whom I loved, but whose presence reminded me of responsibility and pressure. Not a mentor or an admired figure, specifically someone I had helped. Someone whose life had bent slightly in a better direction because of something I had done or said or given. He said that a man who carries evidence of his own generosity moves through the world differently than a man who carries only evidence of his own needs. He said, when you know what you are capable of giving, you stop mistaking yourself for someone who only takes. I thought of a young man named Shmaryahu Bloom, who had worked for me 7 years earlier, just out of a difficult period in his family. No qualifications that a resume could capture. Nervous in a way that made interviewers uncomfortable. I had given him a chance on instinct. He had turned out to be one of the most meticulous, loyal people I had ever worked with. He had left my company when it began its slow dissolution, not out of disloyalty, but because I had told him to. I had seen it coming and helped him find a position elsewhere before the walls came down. He had sent me a short message a year later telling me it had changed his life. I had that message saved somewhere. I had never printed it. I printed it the day I returned home from Tzfat. I want to tell you what happened next, and I want to be careful about how I tell it, because the temptation is to make it sound like a fairy tale, where the 3 objects produced an immediate miracle. That is not what happened. What happened was quieter and, I think, more real. What happened was that I changed the atmosphere inside my own decision-making. Within 4 months of returning, I had restructured 2 key agreements in ways I had previously been too anxious to propose. I had approached a partnership conversation that I had been postponing for over a year. One of those conversations you keep circling because the fear of a no feels worse than the cost of not asking. I had that conversation. The answer was yes. I had made 3 hiring decisions with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, choosing based on instinct sharpened by confidence, rather than instinct dulled by scarcity. I am not going to tell you that my wallet turned my life around. That would be an insult to the work, to the sleepless nights, to every difficult phone call and renegotiated term. But I will tell you with complete honesty that the 3 objects shifted something in me that no spreadsheet had been able to reach. They changed the story I told myself every time I opened that wallet and reached inside. Rabbi Nachmanov is still in Tzfat as far as I know. He does not have a social media presence. He does not do interviews. He is not interested in being discovered. The conversation I had with him lasted less than 2 hours, and yet it sits in my memory as one of the most clarifying experiences of my adult life. If you carry a wallet, I want you to stop right now. After this, not while driving, not mid-conversation, and open it. Look at what's inside. Not the cards, not the cash. Look at what the arrangement of objects is saying about you. Is it saying that you are a person who is prepared to receive? Or is it saying that you are a person who is prepared to lose? The 3 things the rabbi told me. A handwritten line of something you hold as sacred, even if you define sacred in entirely secular terms. A line from a poem, a principle, a sentence your grandmother said that you have never forgotten. A coin or small token held during a moment of genuine gratitude, something your fingers can find in the dark. And a small photograph or printed word from someone whose life you touched. Not because you were obligated, but because you chose to. None of this costs more than the price of a sheet of paper and 20 minutes of your time. My father, Binyamin Ashkenazi, died 4 years ago, before I went to Tzfat. He died still believing that the universe only spoke in numbers. I loved him, and I miss him, and I think he was half right. The universe does speak in numbers, but the numbers come after the intention. And the intention lives, in some small but measurable way, in the objects you choose to carry against your body every single day. Open your wallet tonight. Think about what story it tells. And if you found something useful in this, if even one of these ideas landed somewhere real inside you, then do something small for me. Subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell, because the conversations I want to keep having, about money, about meaning, about the ancient wisdom that modern life keeps trying to make us forget, they are just beginning, and I don't want you to miss what comes next.